Hello, Bible readers. So, a giant lesson was being taught by God through that wonder bread that appeared each day in the wilderness, manna. Manna taught that bread would be given, a surplus would be available, but not hoarded. Storing the abundance was not only unnecessary, it was forbidden. Israel was learning to depend on God reliably every day for their deepest, most obvious need. They were being trained to follow a way that led to equality, as everybody each had enough, and a right relationship with power. God was not forcing them to work for food, and none of them were becoming more able to access food than anybody else. Just receive it, and no more than one day's worth. So that was the way that was being taught. But then an additional word is offered. In chapter 16, verse 23, God says, bake what you want to bake, boil what you want to boil, as much as you want. It's going to keep an extra day. Why? Because on the seventh day, no work shall be done, not even food gathering. And this is where we can see the importance of Sabbath rest in the mind of God. For the sake of the community, Sabbath observance and learning the lessons that come from observing the Sabbath, that's going to trump daily dependence upon food being given. This lesson of loaves abound that I talked about in the last post, that's going to get 6 days a week. But on the seventh, a different lesson is going to be taught, and that lesson is going to be that God will rest, and so shall we. That God's heavenly bakery is closed 1 day a week. And if God rests, so shall we. So Brueggemann names two important conclusions here. Number one, even in the most dire of circumstances, that is life in the wilderness, where scarcity would be assumed, Sabbath is not to be violated due to anxieties about whether there's going to be enough to eat. The pressures of scarcity could legitimate food gathering. I mean, it really does make me think about the shutdown during the pandemic. I could legitimate hoarding toilet paper because I've heard on the news and I've seen in different stores that toilet paper's all gone. So I better get in on it and get me some, 72 rolls for the next week or two. Of course, it turned out to be a little longer than that, but you know what I mean. The pressures of scarcity can make some of us feel like, well, we should gather food every day. And in this case, it's food, not toilet paper. I mean, you can't eat toilet paper. You got to have food. So you would think if there's a scarcity mindset, we're in the wilderness. If ever there's a reason to not observe Sabbath, it would be because you're in the wilderness. Food gathering must be necessary work there, worthy of an exception. Because what if? What if? That's a question we still ask in our day, and we don't even live in a wilderness. We live in a paradise that flows with clean water and everything we need in abundance, and we still ask, what if? But God is saying what the community needs more than to work in any way on the Sabbath is to not work. That's what the community needs, is to not work. The other conclusion is that Israel is humbled. This is the other result of Sabbath observance. In Deuteronomy 8, it's going to say, he humbled you by letting you hunger, then by feeding you with manna, with which you nor your ancestors were acquainted, in order that you would understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. And when we think we're in control of things, that's when we stop listening to the word of God. Remembering that we're not even in control of our own food supply, that we're not in control of the most basic necessities of life, remembering that once a week, observing Sabbath, that's how we get humbled from thinking we're our own gods. Israel is humbled because it's not in control of its own food supply, and it remembers that every week. Do you ever like knowing that you're not in control? Like, that can be tough, right? In the New Testament, Luke tells a story about a farmer who never thought he had enough. It's a story about greed, wanting more and more and more. And it ends with chapter 12, verses 22 and 23 saying, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, for life is more than food." It's the same idea that Deuteronomy was getting at. Observing the Sabbath becomes a way to express identity. So that's the other thing is as much as observing Sabbath humbles us and reminds us we're not in control, it also is a way to express identity as one who trusts in a reliable, gracious God rather than trusting ourself, a market, a king, or an economy. When the Jews are exiled to Babylon, they lived in an empire that's just like every other empire. That empire in Babylon had an insatiable hunger for wealth, for power, and it was driven by a few at the top of the system who took advantage of many on the bottom of the system that offered cheap labor. It's just like Egypt worked under Pharaoh. It's just like Rome worked under Caesar. It's just like our own nation works in our own times. How could Jews distance themselves from these habits of empire? Every seventh day, even in Babylon, they could just sit there and trust that God was even more reliable than the king, than this worldly power or any worldly power. Sabbath observance could express trust even when they're in the wilderness. Sabbath observance could express trust even when they're exiles in Babylon. Sabbath observance expresses trust anywhere, in any era. Sabbath observance is a disciplined expression of an alternative identity. It says we are people of God, not people of the clock, a paycheck. We're not people of worry. We're not people of scarcity. We are people who trust, humbled to know we can't provide for ourselves, so we're just going to sit and do nothing, knowing that something will be provided for us tomorrow. Here's a great line. The destiny of God's creatures is not accumulation. It is a restful confidence that God's creation is a gift that will keep on giving. My next post is going to take us into the 19th chapter of Exodus, verses 4 to 6. Read with me through chapter 19 when we talk about, the name of the chapter is Deliverance Become Covenant. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.